Hi students, welcome to lesson number 49, Max Weber, part A. Max Weber is a great thinker and researcher in the field of sociology. He was a profound scholar and a prolific writer. He entered the field of sociology through law and remained as one among the great sociologists of the 20th century. Max Weber, born in Germany and educated in University of Heidelberg in Germany. Weber in his life earned varied experiences as a soldier, a professor, a politician, a legal expert, and as a sociologist. Weber was considered as one of the founding fathers of sociology. He lectured in the last 3 years of his life, that is between 1918 to 1920, in the universities of Vienna and Munich. Two of his lectures, Science as a Vocation and Politics as a Vocation, were very famous. Max Weber's memorable academic contributions are Economy and Society, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, The City, Bureaucracy, The Organization, The Theory of Social and Economic Organization, etc. Now let us discuss about the objectives of this lesson. The main objectives of this lesson are to discuss about the Weber's concept of 𝗧𝗏, ideal type, social action, power and authority. Second one, to discuss about the Weber's theory of religion or Weber's thesis on Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. Concept of 𝗧𝗏. Weber felt that sociologists had an advantage over natural scientists. That advantage resided in the sociologist's ability to understand social phenomena, whereas the natural scientist could not gain a similar understanding of the behavior of an atom or a chemical compound. The German word for understanding is 𝗧𝗏. Weber's special use of the term 𝗧𝗏 in his historical research is one of his best known and most important contribution to the methodology of contemporary sociology. Weber's thought on 𝗧𝗏 derived from a field known as hermeneutics. Hermeneutics was a special approach to the understanding and interpretation of published writings. Its goal was to understand the thinking of the author as well as the basic structure of the text. Weber sought to extend this idea from the understanding of text to the understanding of social life. In other words, Weber sought to use the tools of hermeneutics to understand actors' interaction and indeed all of human history. To him, 𝗧𝗏 involved doing systematic and rigorous research rather than simply getting a feeling for a text or social phenomena. In other words, for Weber, 𝗧𝗏 was a rational procedure of study. The key question in interpreting Weber's concept of 𝗧𝗏 is whether he thought that it was most appropriately applied to the subjective states of individual actors or to the subjective aspects of large scale units of analysis. Weber used 𝗧𝗏 approach in his study on Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. 𝗧𝗏 involves both approaches. Number one, to identify the sense of the action as intended by the actor. Number 2, to recognize the context in which the action belongs and make sense. Weber's focus on the cultural and social structural context of action leads to the view that 𝗧𝗏 is a tool for macro level analysis. Weber's entire sociology was based on his conception of social action. He was concerned with action that clearly involved the intervention of thought processes and the resulting meaningful action between the occurrence of a stimulus and the ultimate response. To put it slightly differently, action was said to occur when individuals attached subjective meanings to their action. To Weber, the task of sociological analysis involved the interpretation of action in terms of its subjective meaning. In embedding his analysis in mental process and the resulting meaningful action, Weber was careful to point out that it is erroneous to regard psychology as the foundation of the sociological interpretation of action. In his action theory, Weber's clear intent was to focus on individuals and patterns and regularities of action and not on the collectivity. Action in the sense of subjectivity, understandable orientation of behavior exists only as the behavior of one or more individual human beings. The sociology of action is ultimately concerned with individuals, not collectivities. Weber utilized his ideal type methodology to clarify the meaning of action by identifying 4 basic types of action. Not only is this typology significant for understanding what Weber meant by action, but it is also in part the basis for Weber's concern with larger social structures and institutions of greatest importance is Weber's differentiation between the 2 basic types of rational action. The first is means ends rationality or action that is determined by expectations as to the behavior of objects in the environment and of other human beings. These expectations are used as conditions or means for the attainment of the actor's own rationality, pursued and calculated ends. The second is value rationality or action that is determined by a conscious belief in the value for its own sake of some ethical, aesthetic, religious and other forms of behavior, independently of its prospects for success. Affectual action, which was of little concern to Weber, is determined by the emotional state of the actor. Traditional action, which was of far greater concern to Weber, is determined by the actor's habitual and customary ways of behaving. It should be noted that although Weber differentiated 4 ideal typical forms of action, he was well aware that any given action usually revolves a combination of all 4 ideal types of action. In addition, Weber argued that sociologists have a much better chance of understanding rationality than affection or tradition. Now let us discuss about the structures of authority. Weber's sociological interest in the structures of authority was motivated by his political interests. Although Weber was almost as critical of modern capitalism as Marx was, he did not advocate revolution. He wanted to change society gradually, not overthrow it. He had little faith in the ability of the masses to create a better society. But Weber also saw little hope in the middle classes, which he felt were dominated by short-sighted, petty bureaucrats. Weber was critical of authoritarian leaders. However, he had a hope in the great political leaders rather than with the masses or the bureaucrats. Weber preferred democracy as a political form, not because he believed in the masses, but because it offered maximum dynamism and the best environment to generate political leaders. Weber noted that authority structures exist in every social institution, and his political views were related to his views on the polity. Weber began his analysis of authority structures in a way that was consistent with his assumptions about the nature of action. He defined domination as the probability that certain specific commands or all commands will be obeyed by a given group of persons. Domination can have a variety of bases, legitimate as well as illegitimate. But what mainly interested Weber were the legitimate forms of domination, or what he called authority. What concerned Weber and what played a central role in much of his sociology were the three bases on which authority is made legitimate to followers: rational, traditional, and individual action. But he rapidly moved to the large scale structures of authority. Authority legitimized on rational grounds rests on a belief in the legality of enacted rules and the right of those elevated to authority under such rules to issue commands. Second one, authority legitimized on traditional grounds is based on an established belief in the sanctity of immemorial traditions and the legitimacy of those exercising authority under them. Authority legitimized by charisma rests on the devotion of followers to the exceptional sanctity, exemplary character, heroism, or special powers of the normative order sanctioned by them. All these modes of legitimizing authority clearly imply individual actors' thought process, beliefs, and actions. Concept of ideal type. The concept of ideal type is one of the major concepts in Weberian sociology. According to Max Weber, an ideal type is an analytical construct that serves the investigator as measuring scale to ascertain similarities as well as deviations in concrete cases. The idea behind the concept of ideal type is social phenomena by virtue of their manifold and fluid nature can be analyzed solely in terms of the extreme forms of their characteristics, which can never be observed in their purity. An ideal type is a concept constructed by a social scientist on the basis of his or her interests and theoretical orientation to capture the essential features of some social phenomena. The most important thing about ideal types is that they are heuristic devices. They are to be useful and helpful in doing empirical research and in understanding a specific aspect of the social world. Ideal types are not the product of the whim or fancy of a social scientist, but are logically constructed concepts. In Weber's view, the ideal type was to be derived inductively from the real world of social history. Weber did not believe that it was enough to offer a carefully defined set concepts, especially if they were deductively derived from an abstract theory. The concepts had to be empirically adequate. In order to produce ideal types, researchers had first to immerse themselves in historical reality and then derive the types from that reality. Although ideal types are to be derived from the real world, they are not to be mirror images of that world. Rather, they are to be one-sided exaggerations of the essence of what goes on the real world. In Weber's view, the more exaggerated the ideal type, the more useful it will be for historical research. Weber offers several varieties of ideal types. First one, historical ideal types. These relate to phenomena found in some particular historical epoch. For example, the modern capitalistic marketplace. Number two, general sociological ideal types. These relate to phenomena that cut across a number of historical periods and societies. For example, bureaucracy. Third, action ideal types. These are pure types of action based on the motivation of the actor. For example, effectual action. Then fourth point is structural ideal types. These are forms taken by the causes and consequences of social action. For example, traditional domination. Ideal types constitute the theoretical building blocks for the construction of a variety of theoretical models, and these models are then used to analyze specific historical developments. Now let us discuss about Weber's theory of religion or Weber's thesis on Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. Marx and Weber have written extensively about the relationship between society and religion on the one hand, and the role of religion in socio-economic changes on the other. Their views, however, differed significantly. The theory of religion or sociology of religion established by Max Weber clearly indicates that there is a close relationship between the religious beliefs of the people and their economic activities. Weber wrote extensively on the subject of religion. Weber presented his views on religion in his essay on Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. He observed a close connection between religious and economic forces. His concept of religion is more ethical than theological. Religion is vital influence in everyday life. Weber wanted to examine its influence on the life of people. In his studies in the sociology of religion, Weber was trying to answer one fundamental question: to what extent the religious conceptions of the world and of existence have influenced the economic behavior of various societies. Weber wanted to explain economic behavior in terms of religion. For him, economic factor is not the only factor which influences religion. On the other hand, religion itself gets influenced by social system, ethics of community and the economic system. Weber was very much fascinated by the growth of modern capitalism of the West, which was rapidly transforming the European and American societies of his time. But why had capitalism first emerged in Europe rather than in, for example, China or India, was a question for which Weber wanted to find a suitable answer. Weber undertook a massive study of the major world religions and the societies in which they were found and concluded that the answer lay in specific religious beliefs, say Calvinism. In other words, Weber's studies helped him to establish a correlation between the Protestant ethic and the devaluation of modern capitalism in Europe. In other words, Weber's studies helped him to establish a correlation between the Protestant ethic and the development of modern capitalism in Europe. Weber argued that this approach stemmed from the Protestant ethic of hard work and deferred gratification. Weber made two observations. Number one, great material achievements have resulted from the work of monastic orders, and number two, specifically ascetic Protestant sects were noted for their economic success. Therefore, Weber projected a hypothesis. There appeared to be a paradoxically positive relationship between ascetic religious belief and economic enterprise. The religious belief refers to Protestant ethic and economic enterprise denotes capitalism. On the basis of his historical study, Weber asserted that modern capitalism emerged not simply by inner economic necessity, but by the religious ethic of Protestantism and particularly of Calvinism. The early Calvinists believed that they had been predestined by God to salvation in heaven. Weber's contribution to the development of sociology and social thought has been enormous. In all his writings, he has tried his level best to maintain his objectivity, neutrality, analytical approach, historical insight and scientific fervor. Weber has demonstrated that much can be achieved by using the ideal type procedure in social science.